Now, I wanted to ask you about the lab leak stuff and the origins. Is that also a live and let live and never mind? And we don't need to actually do anything to anybody about that stuff.
Oh God. God, can you imagine this? Okay, so I think it's more likely this was a lab leak. But let me set the stage for this. It's not like, Dr. Evil plot kind of thing. It's again the consequence, the bad consequences of good intentions, I think. I think that's the right story here. Let's go back. 2001, the anthrax scare happens. The Bush administration builds this infrastructure to deal with bioterror events. 2006, there's the H5N1 avian flu scare, and people have this idea, well, why don't we use this infrastructure that we deal with for biodefense and have it to civilian uses? And the thought comes up in people's heads, well, we have these genetic techniques to ask how many mutations it takes for a virus that mainly only affects birds to infect humans. We can get vaccines for the viruses even before they've made the leap. 2012, there's a paper published in Science with this exact advance. Someone essentially puts out a formula to weaponize H5N1, publishes it openly in Science. And this is a disease that when it does infect humans, 30% death rate, right? So you have a few chicken farmers die at really high rates from it, but it doesn't make the jump from chickens to humans very easily. And it doesn't make the jump from humans to humans at all. And here's a formula to make it more likely to infect humans. And okay, so 2012, there's this massive pushback within the scientific community. This Cambridge working group pops up and says, this is really freaking dangerous. Don't do this.
This is gain of function research that you're describing?
Yeah, I mean, there's technical aspects of you saw Tony Fauci try to push back and say it's not gain of function, whatever. But that's in any colloquial sense, any real sense, it's gain of function. And there's a pause. President Obama very wisely approves a pause in U.S. funding of this work. 2014, the gain of function pause. 2017, the Trump administration comes in, and essentially Fauci works his way, and the NIH work their way around Trump. I mean, I've talked to some insiders, people who should know, said they didn't even realize it crossed their desk. And they reversed the pause. And they put in place this committee to evaluate every single proposal for gain of function work.
Why were they trying to get around the earlier prohibition? What was the imperative in terms of the scientific questions?
They think that it's absolutely necessary to know which viruses are likely to make the leap. They're not doing this because of nefarious reasons. They're doing it because they honestly believe that if they go into bat caves in China, pull the viruses out of those bat caves and bring it into a lab to do this kind of work, they can develop vaccines faster. They can protect human populations from this natural zoonosis threat that exists. They think they're doing good. That's what makes it so freaking dangerous. They're not like Dr. Evil. They think they're doing good. It's hard to do this work because if you do this in a BSL-4 lab, you're wearing a spacesuit. It's hard work. It's easy to make a slip, right? You just forget to put your mask on one day. This virus, this COVID virus, in 2021, there was a lab in Taiwan studying this virus, and there's a lab leak. It's a high security lab, a lab leak of this virus in Taiwan in 2021, knowing what this virus is. Okay, maybe there's some theoretical benefit from developing vaccines early or whatever to potential threats, but you might actually raise the probability of the threat happening because of this accident in a lab. I think that's what happened. I think that's likely, very, very, very likely what happened.
How costly was the lack of cooperation or candor from the Chinese government about what happens in Wuhan and beyond to the project of responding effectively at a global level to the pandemic?
I think it was tremendously costly. I don't know this for a fact. And now the reporting is sometime in November 2019, there was a lab leak. So let's just say that 2019 story is true. 3 workers that were exposed to this virus. Suppose in a counterfactual world, those workers had said, oh my gosh, I've made this mistake. And then they've been quarantined for 2 weeks and they get their illness and they get better. But they're not going back to their families. It doesn't get outside of that. And then the Chinese authorities told everyone there's a leak. We should be really careful about it. Either you've suppressed it in its infancy, or it's going to get to basically to 100. Like if they'd gotten to 0 right then, it would have been 0. By March of 2020, the attempt to lock down was so far outside the bounds of possibility that it was ridiculous. The only thing you could do was try to protect people that were really vulnerable at that point. That would have been the right thing. You have to, but then that would have taken the psychological step of saying, oh my God, we really don't have the technology to stop the spread. So I think in the sense that you mean it is, it was tremendously harmful that there wasn't cooperation by the Chinese authorities to tell the world that this had happened immediately when it happened. It was also tremendously harmful for and irresponsible of the American government to fund this work in places where they knew for a fact that there was lax security in terms of working with dangerous viruses. They fund the work in Wuhan because it's harder to get this work done in the United States because you have to do this more security. But even in the United States, Glenn, I'm not sure you can work with viruses like this safely. I just don't think it's possible to work with viruses like this safely. Anything we learned from the last 3 years is that it's so dangerous that we probably just don't want to do this. Kind of like with the nuclear test ban treaty. We won't test nuclear weapons above ground like this. It's so dangerous for human populations. It's just not worth it. We kind of need to break the sorcerer's wand, like a scientific tool we just won't use because it's too dangerous. This seems to be like a international treaty banning this thing. We have to start thinking about the same way we think about chemical weapons, right? It should induce horror in us.
It does involve a kind of imposition on science, doesn't it? To say these things are too dangerous.
I mean, I do think that's exactly right. The issue is, what does it cost us to get that knowledge, right? So like a scientific conversation on basically almost everything is not so dangerous, I think, that you have to restrict it. But there are some things that we've discovered in science that are so dangerous. And I don't mean like the end point of it, because we don't know what the end point of it is, but I mean just the playing around with it. I was reading this account of Fermi and in his experiments in the University of Chicago squash court in the nuclear pile, right? And they'd done this calculation saying, okay, it's not going to set off a chain reaction that's going to burn the entire world up. But what if they were wrong, Glenn? What if they were wrong? They were like playing with these nuclear reactor essentially in a major population center. And what if their calculations were off by a little bit and there was this unstoppable chain reaction that burns the world up? That was a really dangerous experiment.
I'm trying to wonder how they might have even begun to estimate the likelihood that the reaction would not be contained. I don't know enough of the physics to know how to approach the problem, but presumably the number was bigger than zero.
Yeah. There's something, I mean, like science is dangerous in one sense, right? We're going to learn new things about the world. But like when we are pretty sure that something is so dangerous that it can cause the devastation of the lives of tens of millions of people, like this, I mean, like this experiment gone awry. That's what it did. I mean, let's be honest. Like it was an experiment, a science experiment gone awry that led to the misery of the last 3 years. What do you do with that? I would love to resurrect William Shakespeare to write Tony Fauci. Like he signed off on this experiment, and now it's January 2020, and he might think to himself, my God, this experiment I funded led to this. What do I do? Well, what they did was that it was funny. They tried to destroy the careers of prominent scientists that were saying that it might have been a lab leak in January 2020. You can look at the FOIA emails. It's the same play. They tried to create this illusion of consensus that it wasn't a lab leak.